Hello, this is Lady B, and this week I wanted to do a step-by-step instructions on how to make bracelets using silk cord and knotting between your beads for extra security. If you're at all worried that they're going to break for any reason, it's the most secure way to make them. And it's not that difficult, but it is meticulous. So let's get started. Here you can see everything you are going to need to do this. Going in order, starting down here, we have the beads ourselves. This is what I will be making my bracelet out of. We have some art glue. You'll be needing that to glue some of the knots, not all of them, just some. We need a clasp of some kind. This is my set of lobster clasps. They come in every color that I could possibly want. If you are doing a standard lobster clasp, you also need rounds. They come like this. You can see where you have, for each lobster clasp, you also have a round O-ring, is what they're called, that you can use then to attach the lobster clasp when you're attaching your bracelet. You need a mat and or a bead tray. This helps you keep you from losing your beads because they will roll away and you will lose them. You need your silk. It comes in multiple sizes. We'll discuss that more later. If your silk does not come with a built-in needle, you need beading needles. That's what these are. These little thin, fine needles. They come with this. This is for helping you to get your cord onto your needle because the needles are so small, it can be very difficult to string it without one of these. You need, and I cannot stress this enough, you need either a beading tweezers. They're really, really fine tweezers that come to a really fine point, or something similar. I use my shaping pliers that are used for my jewelry that I can use to make different size O-rings. They come to a really fine point here, so I find that they work okay for me. But if you don't have a set of these and you plan to do a lot of this, buy the beading tweezers instead. The last thing you need, next to last thing you need, is something to cut with. Scissors, or I have here my wire cutters. I find they do double duty. I don't need the scissors if I have them, but either way you're going to need something to cut with. And the very last thing you need is either a fabric measuring tape like this or a string that you don't mind throwing away and a ruler, and I'll show you why now. The first thing you do when you are making your bracelet is you need to decide what size it's going to be. And you do that by measuring either your wrist or your hand. If you are planning on having it small enough that it cannot fit over your hand no matter what and will not come off, then you take your measurement here on your wrist. And let me do that where you can see. I wear these gloves all the time, so I'm taking the measurement over my gloves. But you can see here that over my gloves, my measurement is 8.5 inches around my wrist. Right there. Now, if you want it to be something you can actually slip tightly, but slip over your hand, then you need to take your hand and hold it together tight like this, and then measure around the thickest part. And I find on my hand at least the difference is 1 inch. Where the other is 8.5, this is now 9.5. Now I have used both measurements depending on what style I am doing. Before I count out my beads, however, you take that measurement and you then subtract the measurement for your clasp. Like I have this clasp here, with my O-ring, and together they measure, let me do that below it so you can see better. Below it, they measure 3/4 of an inch. So I would subtract 3/4 of an inch from that measurement to figure out, when I count my beads, how many beads I need. Now, when you're doing beading and you're not knotting, you also have to add 1/4 to 1/2 inch for the, depending on the size of your beads, so that you have that extra give, that extra bulk that's going to be created around your wrist. But with beading, you don't bother with that, because the knots in between your beads will be creating that extra space for you. Now, I also am not using this measurement because I am actually making emergency alert bracelets, for which I use 2 lobster clasps and my medical alert tag. And together they come to 2 inches. So for me, the measurement I want my beads to be, if it goes all the way around my hand where I can slide it on, is 7.5, or if I want to have to clasp it on, is 6.5. And that is what I will need to count my beads at. So now you're going to be going, what is counting beads? Well, counting beads is literally that. You lay down your ruler. Let me do this like this. Or your tape or whatever you have. And you're going to take your beads and you're going to set them next to it on a surface that they will not roll on. And you place them along it until you get to the length you want. And this is when you predetermine your pattern. You figure out what you want it to look like, what the bead order is. This is a very simple pattern. I'm just alternating these larger beads and these smaller beads, so it's very simple. But if you're doing a more complicated pattern with a lot of different beads, then this is where you can figure out what it's going to look like when you're done. And I'm looking for 7.5. There I go, 7.5. So it's just under, but I should be okay with that because of the beading. So there is my counted beads. Now there are bead boards you can buy. They sold on Amazon, among other places. You could probably find them in stores that sell jewelry supplies, where it has the numbers, the measurements marked on the board, and they have little grooves that you can put your beads in, and you can count them that way. But as long as you have something like, this is just a piece of felt I happen to have from another project left over. If you have something that will keep your beads from rolling, you can do it like this, and you don't have to buy one of those. So these are the correct length. That is exactly what I want, 7.5 inches. So now that I have determined how many beads I need and what my pattern is, any bead I am not using, I keep in my bead tray. And this is just a tray that has a lip on it that they can roll around on, and they're not going to fall off. I'm not going to lose any. Very, very, very important. So my next step is determining what size of thread I need. I have here 3 sizes. I have a number 2 or 0.45 millimeters, a number 4 or 0.6 millimeters, and a number 6 or 0.70 millimeters. The size you want depends on your bead. You want one that is just barely thick, thin enough that if you pass it through the smallest hole, these black beads have a little smaller hole than my other one, but if I pass it through the hole in the black bead one way, and then, oh, I gotta straighten this needle out better, and then I pass it back through the other way, I will just be able to pass it through twice. and it will fit. So let's see if I can do that. Yes. See there? That fits twice. That means this is the correct size for my beads, which is the number 6 or 0.7 millimeters. If you do not have the built-in needle, this would be too thick. For example, my number 4 is missing its needle because I was using it for another project and I messed up, accidentally got a knot in it, ended up having to cut off my needle. So for this one, I would be using my beading needles. If you are using the beading needles where it's not built in, it has to be able to pass through 3 times because you are going to have that doubled over cord where it is passing through the needle. So once there are going to be times that you are passing this needle through your bead twice. So you have to have both that first cord going through plus the double cord when you pass the needle back through. So if I was using my beading needles, I would have to go down to a size 4. But I am not. I'm using this, so I have size 6 is my correct size. The next thing you do before you do anything else is you stretch your cord. Now, I have a little video on how that's done. This cord has already been stretched, so I do not need to stretch it. But do not forget to stretch your cord. If you do not, after you have finished making your bracelet, the cord will stretch out and you will end up with gaps in your bracelet and it will no longer be the same size. Just double checking, but yes, this is still nice and tight. Okay. So, getting to the beading. Step 1 for actually making my bracelet. I am going to take my first 3 beads and I'm going to put them on. After tying a knot in the end, I'm going to put them on my cord, my silk cord, from the back to the front. I will be coming back through these, and the third one that I put on is going to end up being the one closest to my clasp. So I put them on in reverse order. Now with this, it doesn't matter because my pattern is so simple, but if you have a more complicated pattern, that is important. So 1, 2, and then 3. And I'm going to push them all the way down my cord till I'm within 6 inches of the end. Now I'm going to take my clasp. I have to take it off of this. And I put it on my thread. Now, I'm going to let these go all the way to the end just to get them out of the way. And remember, 6 inches from the end, I'm now going to tie a square knot. So now that I have that square knot tied, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pass back through this third bead, which is now the first. And push it up next to my clasp. Pull it through smoothly. There we go. And now again, I'm going to tie a square knot right here. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the next 2 beads. And there we have our first 3 knots. Now I'm going to use my scissors or my clippers. And I'm going to cut off this excess here. And I'm going to drop a bead of glue on all 4 of those knots. So I'm using a toothpick to get the glue on the knot there because I can't get it between. And since this glue dries clear, it won't show at all. And that will just help keep you those anchor knots from coming undone. All right. So now we move on to our standard beading. And this is where these come in. So we take our next bead in the chain and put it on. And then we have to tie a knot. So the trick to it, doing the beading, the knotting, is you grab your bead with your thumb and your first finger, and I like to use my pinky finger to hold the lower one so that the bead doesn't just slide off. And then you take your cord and you wrap it around your fingers 2.5 times. Once you've wrapped that around, you pull it through to create your knot. Now I'm going to reach through the opposite direction I pulled that through, and I'm going to reach through with my pliers through the hole and grab the cord right there as close to the bead as possible. It's very important because this is what will determine how tight it is. Okay. I then let go of my loop and just very slowly pull my knot. And it's going to pull right onto that. And then I let go and I use the same, so I've got the knot right here. I'm going to grab those same tweezers now, and I use the tweezers to push the knot down as close to the bead as possible. Like that. Let me show you that again. I'm going to put on my bead, put it all the way down. Using my left hand, or right-handed if you're left-handed, I'm going to grab the bead with my thumb and my third finger. I'm going to use my pinky finger to hold the bead below it that is already tied so it won't go anywhere. I'm then going to wrap this around 1.5 times, pull it through my loop, creating my knot. Then coming from the back through the loop in the opposite direction I pulled it through, I reach through and I grab my cord as close to my bead, top of my bead as possible. I then let go, pull it down until it has created a knot, and it has created this knot on. You can see how it's actually tied to one end of my pliers there. I then grab my bead again with my thumb and my third finger and pull that out of the knot, hold my thread with these 2 fingers, and without pulling it tight, I use my pliers to push the knot down onto the bead. So that then as I do pull it tight, it tightens right where I want it. That's it. And I'm going to do this now for every bead until I get to my last 3. So that is all but the last 3. So now I'm going to put them on in order, the correct order. Unlike the first time where we did it in reverse order, this one time they're going on in the correct order, and I'm just sticking all 3 on. 1, 2, 3. And now I'm also going to put on my other clasp. Now, for a standard bracelet, this would be an O-ring, but because I'm using it as an emergency bracelet, it is a second lobster clasp. Either way, whichever one you're doing, you put it on. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave a little bit of space between these, and I'm going to tie a double knot here. I'm going to tie it the same kind of knot we've been doing. It's just a loop that you then pull it through. And now before I pull this tight, I'm positioning these so I have just a little bit of space between these beads, and then a little bit just a little bit between my lobster clasp and my first bead, and then I'm going to grab with the tweezers and tighten the knot right there. And now I'm going to do that again. Just create a loop, pull your thread through it, put the loop down over the clasp, and then tighten. So I have a double knot there holding my clasp in place, and just a little bit of space between these last 3 beads. Now, to finish it off, I pass my thread back through my first bead, closest to the end, and now I'm going to do the same thing I did before, only I'm kind of going backwards in a way. I'm going to hold it 2.5 times, create a knot, let the knot slip down in between that bead and the next one, and then I will pull it tight up by the bead. Then I'll go through the next bead and do the same thing. Now again, I'm going to hold it, create my loop, create my knot, and now this time I bring that knot down between my second and my third, and I tie that into a knot. And now I'm going to go through my third bead. Now, there is already a knot between my third and my fourth bead, so I do not need to tie a knot there. But if I have overestimated how much space I have there, and I have a little extra give, I can tie a knot to take up that space. Yep, that is asking for another knot. So I will do a final knot even though it is not required. And now back to my glue and my scissors. I cut off my excess. Let's pull that tight first. If I had done it right, there would not have been the excess space there, but evidently I didn't. So now I'm going to take my glue and my toothpick, and I'm going to put some glue on my knots. The knot here between the 3rd and the 4th. Dab a knot of glue there. Between my 1st and my 2nd. And then, of course, a little dab of glue on the knot where either your O-ring or, in my case, my 2nd lobster clasp is. Wipe off the excess. And that is done. And with that little bit of glue on those knots, they won't come undone. So it is finished. That's my bracelet. So let's see if I got the size right. If I did, I will be able to just slide it on to my hand. Yep, and there it is. The larger size. And it's done. And I have enough for another one. Maybe I'll do that right now. So there it is finished. It is a little large. I probably should have used the smaller measurement instead of the larger measurement for it, because the knotting does add space, and the more knots, the more space it's going to add. But I do like it sometimes this loose, so I'm quite happy with it. So the question is, why would you knot this instead of just putting on a cord? And the answer is very simple. There's 2 reasons. One would be appearance. Maybe you just like the way it looks knotted in between. The second is security. The silk cord is stronger and less likely to break than other cords, but it can still break. And if you have knotted between your beads, if it breaks, your beads aren't going to go everywhere. And I do mean everywhere. I've had it happen a couple of times to me on these with other styles of bracelets. And it is nice not to have to be on the floor crawling around picking up beads everywhere you find them. So also, I'm going to really quickly measure this just to see how much extra space it actually gave. I guessed a 1/2 inch, but in reality, I started with a 7.5. Yes, 7.5, and I was correct. It added an extra 1/2 inch. So that 1/2 inch is quite a lot. If you find this too loose, then seeing how I have it, then you will want to subtract a 1/4 inch when you count your beads to make it not so loose. So that is just something to take into account. So there it is. My emergency alert bracelet with tied and knotted beads on a silk cord. I love you all, whether new or old. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. In the meantime, remember, whether doing this, making your own bracelets, or some other craft, don't be afraid to suit yourself and make whatever it is you do exclusively you. And now I gotta find the hole. Where is it? The problem with these black beads is sometimes it's hard to see where the hole is. There it is. Found you. Try not to get any knots in your stuff. like I just about did.